the Everyone Active podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jo.
Hello, I'm Michelle, your other host. That was very quiet and demure.
I know.
Is that because you were stifling a laugh?
hello.
Because before we came on air, we were just giggling. Is that what it was?
No, definitely.
Totally were.
There it is. Couldn't hold it in any
How are
longer.
you?
I'm really good.
What's
Thank
going
you.
on?
I'm happy. There's sunshine. Granted, there's still a bit of rain, but you know what? We don't grow without sunshine and rain, so I'm fine. I'm good.
That was a long-winded way of saying you're fine.
Oh,
then.
do you know what? We've done it again. I've just thought every time we have Ollie and Steph on, who are, by the way, to your left, we end up talking about nature, plants, growing things. And I've started already by going with rain and sunshine, nothing's going to grow.
No, yes, I agree. But we have to be professional this time. Shall we?
Okay.
Welcome.
We're going to go welcome. Hello, team. We are joined again by Steph and Ollie.
Hello.
It is woohoo,
Great
talking
to
about
be here.
Everyone Active, you plus, and now we're talking about move.
Moo. I thought we were talking about water and sunshine and rain.
See,
We
I
were.
see
Sunshine and
it.
rain.
How are you
Sunshine.
both doing?
Oh, that's
How are
about
you doing?
what are we? 6 episodes in. It's the first time you've asked us.
Oh.
I know.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Actually, it's quite a long story. There's some trauma I need to work through.
I want to hear about your gardening, about your weird nature visits that you've been on, Ollie. Come on, let's share.
I think if I could hijack this podcast. No, I'm really well. Thanks.
Good.
I'll keep it top line.
Excellent.
Don't
Steph, how are you? Anything to report in your world?
Just yeah, fantastically loving life.
Oh, blimey.
Days are longer,
We like
sunlight's out there, we're there. But we've brought you both in today again to talk now about our move pillar.
Yes.
So Steph, we've spoken about many a time how Everyone Active do movement and predominantly exercise. But we've called the pillar move. Why are we calling it move or movement rather than just an exercise or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. We talked about it in one of the other episodes very briefly in terms of like how well do people move and how do we relate the word movement and fitness into the same space. And, you know, I think fitness ultimately, it is what is recognised within the gym, but it's quite an intimidating word. It's quite a scary space to step into. And we know a lot of people now come to the gym not to be fit, they come to be well, to feel better. And I think we can stereotype with the word of fitness and what it means and what the perception is going to be. Is everybody going to be like a clad lifting heavy weights and all the weird connotations that come in that gym space? But actually, it's just about being able to move effectively, well, move in different planes of movement, different ways of movement, and enjoying movement. You know, some people do think, oh, exercise, I don't like it. I'm like getting hot and sweaty. It's just miserable. I don't get it. And I get that quite a lot. Like when I'm with friends and they ask me what I do, it's like, oh, you know, personal training and sport. Like, I hate being hot and sweaty. Not for me. It's like, oh, okay. So how do I get that person into this space? Because if I say fitness, it doesn't connect with them.
Yeah, they're locked down, don't they?
But actually, it could be movement. Come and just dancing, or you know, having a walk with friends outside, or connecting with different people in different activities. So for me, the movement was a much more fitting word in this space. And Ollie and I and the team talked about it quite a lot because we didn't want to lose connection with fitness, but actually it's how we relate it in the right spaces through strength, through cardiovascular training, through flexibility, and all of those things that people will be tapping into.
So Ollie, movement. You're always going to get these noises. I just
was
made
gonna say,
those little
I know,
noises
I know.
for me.
You've forgotten them from
It's
the
like,
last
woo!
podcast.
No,
You just blocked it
they're
out.
all coming back to me now.
Oh, they come in, they'll be there. So are we born to move?
I mean, fundamentally, yes. You know, of all the pillars, again, this one is probably our most primal in the sense of really humans are entirely designed to move, and the absence of movement is a huge challenge to all systems of biology. You know, the great danger is, as Steph says, we think the word fitness is a bit tainted, a bit tarnished. It's sort of synonymous with how you look. It's also synonymous with your weight. You know, you look fit, or so what do you mean by that? You know, do you mean my weight looks roughly the appropriate for my height? Is that the right phrase? But also, you know, we underplay the significance of what movement achieves. And I think we can always break movement down into two components. There's the biological benefits of the process. So what do I get from while I'm doing the, let's call it exercise? And then there's the repercussion of that work in terms of how it structurally changes my physiology. And those two things are slightly separate. And I think, you know, we have deliberately broken movement down into component parts that may sound similar, but are markedly different. You know, my daily steps, or my daily, if I can't do steps, my daily activity is a fundamental necessity to keep my circulation going, to keep my digestion going, to optimize the level of sugar in my bloodstream. That is a completely separate biological system to my ability to lift weights, which has a huge role in preserving this vital tissue muscle mass, and a huge role in preserving my bone density to stop me getting fractures and breaks, and a huge role in me avoiding a multitude of diseases. But that's a completely different system to my neurological system, to not topple over when I tie my shoelaces.
Yeah.
And to be able to take 5 steps backwards and 2 steps left, and to be able to jump and land and step off a curb. And that's completely different to my ability to continue to combust energy while I climb Penny Fan over in the Brecons, or go for a walk to the shops. And one of the great dangers of exercise is we sort of bundled it back to our sporting history of, fitness and sport and performance and so on, without reconciling that these different types of movement elicit different physiological benefits, all of which are important, not some of which. And, your body could never have imagined, we're a few minutes into this podcast, I haven't brought up evolution yet, but it's about time.
Wow.
It's about time.
Yay.
Regular listeners will be, there he is, Charles Darwin himself.
Come on.
He's turned up with his theory of evolution. It's a theory. Principally, we could never have imagined that I'd be sat down for this long today. We could never have imagined that I got in a car and sat down, and then after sitting down all day, I sat down at home. We could never have imagined an escalator. Yeah. We could never have imagined, labor-saving devices in terms of muscle strength. I've got, levers and all sorts of things. I cannot combust energy in so many different ways today. And, our forefathers and mothers, they worked the land. They needed an engine to get the water from 2 rivers away, and they needed to get, strength to load things up in the plane. They needed, natural movement patterns because they didn't sit in fixed resistance all day. So I think we've looked to go back to the origins of what it means to have, intelligent physiology, and exercise and movement are ways of preserving or growing that physiology, rather than the act being the principle itself. We have to cross-reference that with most people are inactive.
Yep.
Stats have probably been updated since, but 30% of the UK gets less than 30 minutes of activity a day. So in all things everyone active, U+, we need kindness, and we need, one step more is better than one step less, and one little load into my muscles is better than no load at all, and one bit of flexibility and stretching is better than me becoming a reformer Pilates guru. Yeah. So we're not looking for all in with this. We're looking for more, but we're trying to reconcile that different types of exercise target different biological systems that elicit different benefits. Yeah. And I think the idea that exercise is a way of combusting calories to control weight is still the main headline message above fitness facilities globally. And that boils my blood. To diminish what movement is to the burning of calories is an insult to the singular most impactful thing on every cell in my body, is the quality and consistency of my movement. Yeah. So I tear my hair out that I think fitness has been misreported, misunderstood, and is seen as an additional extra to people's lives. I would argue it is the fundamental pillar. The reason why I believe fitness operators can become the well-being provision of the future is this is arguably the most complicated pillar in terms of programming, sets, reps, what heart rate should I be at, how do I judge it? Yeah. The others are quite simple, as we've determined through our podcast so far. They're not simple to do, but they're quite simple to understand. Yeah. Eat whole foods, go to bed on time, etc. Movement is a little bit more multifactorial. For me, needs a bit more stewardship, a bit more motivation, a bit more support. But if we get this right, all things good flow.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steph, when we're talking about our Everyone Active U+ coaches, they've already got a baseline and are fully qualified personal trainers, fitness motivators, so they've got a greater understanding than probably the majority of the other colleagues that work within our Everyone Active centres in terms of what the body does and how it reacts to stresses or challenges. Can you just talk about what we might, if we're talking about resistance, what are we talking about to our listeners? What's resistance training?
So, and it's good to understand, because I do think, again, like the term fitness, there's a lot of misused terminology in the industry and a lot of assumptions. I think this can be a huge barrier to people. So we talk about resistance training and in terms of strength training, anything where it's lifting weight or using against the force, which is going to challenge that particular system and increase muscle tissue development or sustain the current muscle tissue that the individual would have. So we look at that sort of training being a really powerful one. And I think a lot of people have really shifted into that space because it's become more of a fashion around that kind of strength training, particularly females in strength training, which has been a phenomenal step in a very kind of different direction. But then we start to look at the terminology that starts to come out around cardiovascular training or CV training. And, it's how we're challenging the heart and lungs. And we then talk about intensities and training zones, and you start to get in this world of like, well, what am I actually doing? And ultimately what we're asking for is, are you doing 150 minutes of cardiovascular moderate intense activity over the course of a week? So it could be broken down to different segments. But with that, when we measure that, when we might talk to you about, well, how does that make you feel? We're talking moderate intensity. It doesn't mean anything to people. So we're talking about somebody who's getting out of breath, sweaty, could just about hold a conversation, but it's that kind of level of exercise. Because a lot of people are like, well, I walk the dog. It's like, well, walking the dog strolling down the street on the phone to your mate probably isn't quite hitting that criteria. Yeah. But there are a lot of people that power walk and are out there with the dogs, and very different. So it's helping people understand that. And that's what the U+ coaches will be able to kind of help understand. So when we move into that cardiovascular space and look at kind of challenging the heart and lungs, we don't need to get really detailed in terms of what training zone or what you can, absolutely you can, but you don't need to be. You just need to recognise the very basic reactions to exercise as your measures in terms of whether that's effective for what we're looking to for the criteria. So when we look at the guidelines, and as Ollie mentioned, if you're not hitting that at the moment, that doesn't matter. Can you take a step to get closer to that? And then can you get a little bit more the next day or, in 2-3 weeks' time? I think, unfortunately, a lot of people will look at things like government guidelines and go, well, I've got to strength train twice a week. I've got to do 150 minutes cardiovascular. I don't do either. I must do it all, and I'll do it all right now. And actually you go and you're so sore and broken the next day. You're 4 days getting over that to get back into it.
Well,
and January is always a big sign of that. And we've seen kind of the aftermath where people hit it really hard. They're there 5 days a week, and actually 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, they're there once a week because they can't sustain what they threw at their body. So it's understanding the right amount and the right load and volume. So, then we start to move into flexibility and mobility, and again, lots of different words banded around in this space, but how are you challenging how well you move and how you can kind of push your body in different directions? And it's kind of linking all those three things together. And ultimately, if you rewind to probably when you were children, you played, you moved through play, and it's the most effective way to. So people that still play sports, they move perhaps more freely and more effectively than somebody that very much sits in a traditional gym pathway, because it very much limits some of those factors. So being creative with how you exercise is also really, really important to enable that. I met someone the other day who is late 40s and was sort of suggesting, I take my dogs out for a walk and I climb a tree every day. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. Talk me through that. And she's like, I climb a tree and I hang upside down. I'm like, oh, wow.
Okay.
And she's like, because the minute I stop doing it, I won't be able to. And I was like, I get it.
Yeah, very
actually, because I do get it. But because you go to the gym and you are fit and healthy, but it doesn't necessarily always mean we move well, because we get so focused on, I'm really good at running, so I've just run and run and run and run. And it's not challenging all aspects of the body. And I think that's what's really important when you are in the gym, is trying different things, bringing different types of exercise into it, or different types of movement into it. So it might not necessarily be traditional gym. It could be different aspects, different sports, playing more, playing with your children. Don't be afraid to play with them, because it will help you move more effectively as well.
And Ollie, from our internals and our physiology, so we've spoken about different forms of training and how it hits different parts of our body. Is it again the case of if we aren't training it, we might end up losing the ability to grow it? Or
you'll never lose the ability to grow it, which is great news. It will become harder as we go through stages of life. And because part of building new physiology does require what we call androgen hormones. So for me, predominantly testosterone. For the ladies in the room, predominantly estrogen. And we've all got a bit of these positive hormones. And naturally, as we go through stages of life, we've got less of that available. So it's harder to build new tissue later in life, but you can increase your muscle mass, your cardiovascular fitness, and your mobility in your 80s and 90s unequivocally. So harder, needs better stewardship, but doable. The reality is, there are stages and ages to this, that you are born with this incredible inherent capacity that you may or may not use. And your body gives you a good block of time to work out whether you're going to use it or not. And the easiest thing to think of when we think of human physiology is you are far over-resourced. So most people listening to this podcast will be using 10, 15% of their cardiovascular capacity.
Yep.
So you've got 85% surplus. You could do, you might be sitting down now, you could go for a light jog for 6 kilometers, but you won't do anything close to that today, tomorrow, this week. So you are over-resourced. As the muscle mass required to just stop yourself flopping over and pick up a pen, you might be using 8% of your capacity. So you've got 92% unused. You might have a range of motion that means you could, do the splits and a whole range of interesting movement patterns, but you only sit in a chair all day long. So you're using 75% of your mobility capability. So what happens is the body gives you a period of time where it's got loads of these positive hormones, loads of, you're built out of these stem cells, these incredible cells that can turn into anything. And then your body goes, enough. And it goes, right, at some point, and the tipping point somewhere in the 30s normally,
Okay.
you start to lose your natural capability in those systems at a fairly standardized drop-off rate. So I'll lose about 10%. Let's imagine 35 is the age. And
Yep.
congratulations. Happy birthday, all those who are 35 today. As you swan dive off the cliff of human physiology, chest to breast, you're going to lose. It's a positive message. You're going to lose, at the moment, 10% of your cardiorespiratory fitness or cardiovascular fitness until about 50. Then you lose 15% per decade. So 10% per decade, then 15%. Muscle mass, you'll lose 3 to 5% per decade. Mobility, no one's quite got the stats, but you increasingly stiffen and shorten range of motion each year. So when we sometimes confuse aging with the loss of cardiovascular fitness, strength, and mobility.
Yeah.
And what you see is the visibility of aging, taking aside skin elasticity and changes of hair color and changes in hormone structure. Most of what people accidentally call aging is the biological deterioration in these 3 systems, which are directly mediated by how much training you do. So I am losing what I do not use, coming back to your original point. So if I don't use 100% of the system, I can't complain if I lose 10%.
Yeah.
If I don't use 85% of the system, I can't complain if I lose 15%.
Yeah.
So what is exercise? And we've got to separate our social benefit and our learning and development, skill acquisition, and all the stress management piece. Strip all those aside and go, the minimum thing exercise is to convince your physiology to remain. The minimum. If you want your physiology to extend, exercise can do that also. If I think, okay, I'm using 100% of my muscle, but I actually need 110%, you'll get 10% more.
Yeah.
If I need 120% of my cardiovascular system, I'll get 20% more. So exercise is 2 things. At a minimum, it's a break to slow down the age-related loss of biology. As an extension of that, it's an opportunity to enhance my physiology. And that is really the elixir of longevity.
Before we end the podcast, there are 2 things that I do want to
Killer
talk
question. Are these
about.
killer questions?
Well, kind of. More
Okay.
subjects, I suppose.
Go.
One of them's children, but we'll leave children right until the end. But one of them is, people tend to only do what they like to do.
Yes.
So we'll see people, especially if you look back, maybe 20 years, people that wanted to lift weights were literally only lifting weights.
Yep.
They weren't doing any form of cardiovascular exercise, and they certainly weren't doing mobility or stretching. So can you see now, is there like a phase, is there a actual scientific study of the fact that people that literally just specialised in one area, is there a bigger deterioration in their other internal systems?
I think there won't be a scientific study per se, but you would say you are beholden to your physiology across those areas. So if you have enormous muscle mass but have neglected cardio, then you will not get the benefits from high cardiovascular fitness. So
Yeah.
what's interesting, if we take the idea, if I do not work that system, it will deteriorate. So me having loads of muscle mass doesn't preserve my ability to deliver oxygen to my tissues. Me doing loads of stretching doesn't mean I've got a big cardiovascular system. So the great danger is when we're younger, we're told to subspecialize. Ollie, you're good at running, you're good at lifting, you're good at stretching. So you become a master yogi, you become a power lifter or a runner. And I, these are mock personas. And I become a,
Shoulders for it.
and I become a long distance runner, because then we might all be really good at that.
Yeah.
But so the thing that you were told to do when you were younger then becomes slightly paradoxical, because you probably leaned into your strength as a child. And when we look at well-being, we're interested in equality of systems, not prioritization of one. So a weightlifter who doesn't do cardio won't get the benefit of cardiovascular fitness. And an interesting caveat here is cardiovascular fitness, or more accurately called cardiorespiratory fitness, is the best single predictor of life expectancy. So, you can look beautiful with your, whether that's your aesthetic, all these bulging muscles, low body fat in the mirror, but you could have, a markedly reduced life expectancy compared to someone who doesn't have any of that aesthetic, but is a great cardio athlete. Yeah. Now, on the flip of that, the person who's got great cardio but low muscle mass won't have the bone density and some of the hormonal benefits. And both of those people who specialize, if they aren't mobile, they're more likely to get injured under exercise load.
Yeah.
So you basically, it can't be a pick and choose menu. And one of the things we need, when Steph mentioned earlier, the government guidelines, it is 150 minutes of cardio and 2 strength training sessions and 2 mobility sessions. And that isn't that well promoted because it feels too big a piece of it's a too big a meal to eat. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be nibbling our way towards it. And really what we've got to work out is if you're genetically gifted at something, so if I'm naturally gifted to be more of a cardio athlete, I may not need that full 150 minutes to keep myself in good shape.
Right.
But if I'm genetically good at one thing, I'm probably worse at the other. So I would need 2 weight training sessions to keep the muscle mass that someone who's genetically gifted at strength might get from one session per se. So I think we are trying to get people to the idea that, of course, we have a sedentary population and anything is better than nothing. So what we don't want to do is sit with this big chunk of guideline and people go, I'm never going to get there.
Yeah.
But what we do need to migrate are people from the idea that I do my cardio twice a week, I am fit and well, to you could be fitter and weller if you brought in strength training, and you'd be fitter and weller still if you brought in the mobility stuff. And by the way, in our facilities, in our infrastructure, we've got all the ways of targeting those systems imaginable.
Yes.
But going back to Steph's original point, if I climbed a tree, if I tree climb, I'd probably get cardio, mobility, and strength. So we've got to bear in mind we've created an artificial environment to mirror being farmers and tree climbers, and that's what gyms are. The body doesn't know that you're in a gym; it goes, you've now taken up a new job as a farmer, so I'll calibrate my physiology to being a farmer. Or you've taken a new job as a manual labourer, so I'll build all the systems to support that. The gym, exercise, sport, these are all totally anomalous to your physiology. It's always trying to calibrate what it can do to what you're asking it to do. And that goes 2 ways. If you ask it to do nothing, it will calibrate down. If you ask it to do everything, it will calibrate up. And that's our lifelong journey with exercise.
Yeah, and Steph, I guess from our point of view, specifically the industry that we're working in, there has been so many more recent studies out about the importance of training all areas. And we're going to give a shout out to our Lionesses. Who on the Euros coming up, is that you don't now just see even if we are on international level, they're not just running up and down a football pitch. There's a whole heap of programming that goes beyond and behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's the importance of that rounded training program, which I guess people can get in the centres.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that diversifying it and finding what works for you. Strength training hasn't got to be going and being in a big free weights area. It could be going to a studio class and experiencing it that way. It could be doing aqua resistance, water training. They are all forms of strength or resistance, in different terms we call them, but they're all categorising those same things. I think what we need to recognise is why that's so important. And Ollie's talked here about that longevity piece is each person, so if we had 3 people, they may all still live to 100. But it's how good is that quality of life at 100? And that's what we're measuring in terms of longevity. If I have been strength training and I have done my mobility and I have got my cardiovascular system still active, when I get to 100, I can still get myself up and down out of a chair. I can still walk to a shop. I can still have my own independence to go to the fridge and get my drinks and go to the bathroom myself.
Yes.
And it might be the last 3 or 4 years of my life I need support. But actually somebody who hasn't trained in all of them or is deficient in one of them, they get to 85 and actually they then need the next 15 years of life being supported. And it assumes we don't want to lose our own kind of freedom to do what we need to do and look after ourselves and that independence. But that ultimately is what we're talking about in that space. And that's what we're measuring in terms of that longevity piece. It's not just how long you live, it's the quality that you are living for. Yeah. Everybody wants to live and have the best time. They don't want to be just stuck in a chair watching telly and hoping the next person's going to come and help them do the next thing, because that quality is massively removed from their life. So that's what we're kind of talking about in their space, and that's why those it's finding your way of doing it in a sport or an activity or a whatever hobby it might be that targets those 3 areas, because that's the power in terms of long term where we're getting to. So it's a bit more of a serious one, isn't it, in terms of where we're going with it? Because exercise should be fun, movement should be fun, but ultimately that's the bigger picture when we scope it on that scale.
Yes. And to the polar end of that scale, which was actually my second point, children. So it's really noticeable, and I notice it absolutely looking at younger ones around us, and all of us can say the younger ones around us probably aren't necessarily moving as much as even we did when we were 8, 13 years old, those forming, norming lives. And we've spoken about on previous episodes about an obesogenic society. Are we seeing reactions in bodies happening earlier? Are children, because they're not out climbing trees as much anymore, they are sitting still, are we seeing, is there real life evidence of what's happening to our kids?
Enormous. I think one of the great examples of that is we used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes, but that wasn't relevant because so many children started developing it. So we've got a rise in childhood obesity. The main, and there's many both genetic, environmental, other factors in developing type 2 diabetes. But the main contributing factor is how much body adiposity you have, which is your body fat levels. And kids are more inactive than at any time in modern history. My era growing up, you use your granddad example frequently through these pods.
Yeah.
My kids could be in a digital universe from the minute they wake up to the minute they get home.
Yeah.
Sport has become opt-in rather than opt-out.
Yeah.
And that has changed. And also, we are being guilty. I'm guilty of this, certainly, helicopter parenting. So, the prevalence of a fear-based culture. Am I more at risk from a child abduction now than I was 20 years ago? You'd argue on stats it was worse in the 70s. When I was out on the streets and came home when the street lights came on, my parents had no idea where I was. They had no phone to check on me. And I was out and I was dynamic. Would I let my kids go out without knowing where they are and come home on the street lights? Not in a million years.
Yeah.
And how much of that is about me seeing the horrors of the world piped into me mainstream?
Yeah, it's true.
And versus naivety. Naivety wasn't necessarily a bad thing from that regard. So this helicopter parenting thing, which means I'm stood underneath them when they're climbing a climbing frame, and I don't want them to go out, has been a big feature in the deterioration of free play. Sport has fallen into, again, a sort of nice to have rather than an essential part of childhood. So we're setting patterns of behaviour that are very difficult to retrofit later on in life.
And I suppose this is as well, it's going to be one of the first generations that's ever happened to.
Yeah,
because I talk about grandparents, dad, me, we were moving all the time. We were out after school, we were up trees, we were on the bikes, we were about. And now I'm looking at kids when we get home and it's predominantly straight to the sofa. They do have army cadets and brownies, like they have to go and do things, but it's not a want to go and do things anymore.
They're not going
it's
out to play, are they?
No, but maybe that's our responsibility now to actually make it a bit more normal for kids, like encourage that movement.
I mean, it's that challenge of, there's so many variables in this, for everything from the economics of paying for after school clubs and, you having to take ownership of it and who's looking after the kids. And, it's a real intertwine between cultural change, environmental change, socioeconomic challenges. I think that the bottom line is, the kids coming out of the schooling system, like this Gen Alpha, have a lower threshold to being triggered and stressed because they haven't been in awkward or difficult situations. Grit is when you persevere hard things, when you overcome challenges, and creating an uber safe, uber controlled environment is actually a real risk to children, both from a musculoskeletal physical point of view, but also from a brain health point of view. I know in female football, there was always this sort of question mark over why there was much higher incidence of anterior cruciate ligament injuries in girls. And part of that was around the theory of that they didn't have the best pitches. They played on after the boys and they were sort of much afterthought. Steph's nodding, having played on the pitches when the others had cleared off, the girls were allowed on.
Churned up bogs in the middle of winter.
Churned up bogs. And then there's this thing called the Q angle, which is as you hit adolescence, your pelvis changes a little angle. But one of the big areas was the lack of rough play.
Yes.
And the fact that, being moved in different directions, multi-directional bundling. And, and that, again, you can't ever isolate one single feature, but that's not now a gendered issue, that's a childhood issue.
Yes.
That we aren't forcing kids into biomechanical patterns and challenges that really build the muscle of becoming a grown-up. So then they end up in the workplace, the first time they ever receive negative criticism as their boss, the first time they ever have to do anything difficult, they're overwhelmed. That's not their fault. It's no individual's fault. But unless we bring free play, grit, obstacles back into childhood, it's going to be difficult to create really well versions of adults in the future.
Oh, what a great place to end.
No, I love these.
I know, it's so
sections.
interesting, isn't it?
Like,
I love it.
oh, and then you have your mind ticking about,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
going to go and do this.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just little things. We talk about the importance of just doing little
Yeah.
steps, and a +1 is better than a 0.
Absolutely.
And that's it.
Always.
But team, as always, thank you so much for listening. Please do share. And if you do have questions for me, Mish, Steph, or indeed Ollie, please email us at
podcast@everyoneactive.com. And thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
Joyous.
Team, take care, please share, please like, and we will see you again soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.